Thank you so much, David. It's an honor for me to be with you all today, and I'm so grateful to your chairship for this conference, online conference. I'm also grateful and deeply appreciate all your relentless effort throughout many years in supporting the Iranian resistance people struggle for freedom and democracy, and particularly their organized movement, the PMOI, the Mujahideen, both in Ashraf and also around the world, and the NCRI, for actually leading this campaign, particularly our president-elect, Mrs. Mariam Rajavi, that called upon the international community for justice for the victims of the 1988 massacre. It was since 2015 that our president took the lead in calling upon the world community and parliamentarians, governments, the United Nations, particularly the High Commissioner for Human Rights, as well as the Special Rapporteur on Iran, in order to bring about an international independent inquiry mission to make investigation, to bring the perpetrators to justice, to be able to actually go deep into the extent of this horrible crime committed by the officials of this regime, that many of them at the moment not only are not in hiding, but actually they've taken even much higher position within the mullah's regime hierarchy, and particularly the head of the judiciary power and the judiciary system of the mullahs, which is totally outlaw and of course not compatible to any international norm or standards. But actually that very criminal institution was responsible, the Death Commission, for carrying out this huge, heinous crime against just simply the freedom lovers and the outspoken criticizers of this regime, and mishandling and gross violations of human rights that they have committed throughout many years in Iran. I have to say, unfortunately, I have seen and witnessed the world community and some countries, and in my view, lobbies of policies of appeasement, calling for the lifting of the sanctions under the pretext that it would hurt or damage the Iranian people's life. But everyone knows that after the so-called nuclear agreement in 2015, it was much worse in terms of both social, political. The life of the Iranian people turned into much more misery and facing poverty almost in all various sectors of Iranian society because of huge corruption amongst various layers of this regime. They call that this actually corruption has been institutionalized. Many of officials of the regime acknowledged that huge amount of the money are in the hands of Khamenei, the supreme leader, and 5 major foundations related to him. At least some 200 billions of dollars are in the hands of Khamenei, and particularly its Revolutionary Guards Corps, or we call them Pasdaran. And we have seen how they have been responsible in spending the money, not only for the suppression and repression of Iranian people, and that's why this regime is actually the number 1 in terms of executions in the whole world per capita. And also we have seen how they have been spending the money not only for repression in Iran, but also for expanding and spreading terrorism, supporting financially various terror groups in different countries, particularly Bashar Assad in Syria. Billions of dollars spent in that very nightmare war that resulted in at least 13 million Syrian people homeless. Some, at least 3 million of them, are behind borders in Europe seeking refuge because of non-stop continuous bombing of their civilian cities and huge destruction. We've seen them supporting particularly Hezbollah in Lebanon, which is widely spreading and actually playing a role in terrorism and in massacre of many people, not only in Syria, but also in Lebanon, in Yemen, and we have seen them even in Iraq and in Iran, smashing widespread protests and demonstrations around Iran, particularly in 2018. I have to say that the world community should realize that the illusion is no longer valid. They have to see the reality, and they have to take very substantive steps in order to bring about justice and to punish this outlaw, inhumane regime. They call themselves a government, but they are not in no way representing the Iranian people. It is a creature, it's a beast. They should be called seven-headed dragons that only are responsible for terrible human rights violations and atrocities they committed against both Iranians and many people in the region. The war in Iraq, the continuous war in Yemen, all that started with $150 billion that was given to this regime when the sanctions were lifted under the so-called banner of this nuclear agreement. Justice needs to be done. Members of parliament in Europe, particularly the European Union, the United States, and all around the world, the Middle East, need to cry out. They need to shoulder stand with the Iranian people, demanding that the world community needs not to give any further concession to the mullahs, rather than giving them millions and billions of dollars in order to carry on with killing our youngsters, with killing Navid Afkari, killing Ali Younesi, Amir Hossein Moradi, and many, many thousands more of political prisoners or university students that just had the guts and the courage in order to stand up and cry for freedom, for a nation that only strives for justice and for humanity and human values. That needs to be respected. That needs to be supported by the world community, not criminals in the name of so-called a regime that we know only stays in power because of repression and terrorism. So what we need to call upon is for the United Nations, the Secretary General, various Secretary of State, whether in the United Kingdom or elsewhere in Europe. They need to stop giving concessions. Don't give any money to this regime under whatever banner, whether you want to release Nazanin or any other hostage taken officially by this regime under many various lies that they are so-called spies, or they are counter-revolutionaries, or that they are enemies of God. All this nonsense are only justification for their terror and repression. We need the world community to take substantive steps, first of all, by supporting the NCRI, Maryam Rajavi, president-elect of this resistance movement, for its platform to bring about democracy and freedom in Iran. Second, we need that the embassies of this regime to close down. They were the ones that wanted to bomb our gathering in Paris in 2018, the gathering in Albania in 2019. That regime and their so-called embassies and ambassadors must be expelled, and those actually embassies to close down, because they're not used for any diplomatic or any mutual interests and vital interests of the world community and relationship with other countries in the world. They are just made for them to carry on their plots, their bombings against Iranian dissidents and the world community. And many politicians around Europe that had the courage to stand with our movement. So what I need to ask you is to continue your efforts. Please stand with the Iranian people to continue supporting their uprising. Everyone has seen, especially what happened in 2019, what happened when the regime shot down the IRGC and Pastoran, the Ukrainian aircraft, in order to kill 176 passengers, in order to actually blackmail the world community to give them further concession. That needs to be stopped. We need to see the reimposition of all the sanctions, particularly the 6 resolutions that were passed by the Security Council, and we need all these sanctions immediately. The regime has confessed itself that billions of dollars are lost because no one knows where they have been. 22 billion was given by the Central Bank of Iran to this regime officials to buy goods for the Iranian people for production, but half of it is lost. And this is the story we have heard over and over. The corruption must end. This regime needs to be overthrown by the hands of Iranian people. We need the support of international community to carry on their efforts to bring about maximum pressure against this regime and to take steps that to actually guarantee the support for freedom and democracy to be established in future Iran. Thank you so much for listening to me.